Star Wars Outlaws is a gorgeous-looking, shooty, stealthy, spacey game. Often impressive on a technical level, it's also a lot of fun and does a decent job of living up to its premise, which is essentially Han Solo, the game. It is also formulaic in the ways you might expect, sticking mostly to the well-worn Ubisoft format for action-adventure and retreading very familiar ground in the Star Wars setting. I guess that makes sense. Some fans will definitely get a kick out of visiting the Mos Eisley Cantina, hanging out with Jabba and spotting all the references to Star Wars, old and new. But if you're tired of the ubiquity of this franchise, or of that Ubisoft formula, then obviously you might struggle with this game. It is a very mainstream offering and not the daring new direction that some fans are so desperate for. Also, the open world and many overlapping gameplay systems are a lot for any studio to handle, and despite the beautifully realized world, the game does spread itself quite thin and often sacrifices player freedom in favor of that comfortable and familiar formula. But having played it for nearly 100 hours, I have to say that formula, it kind of worked for me. This is Maya, you're watching Ninja Pulls, and this is my honest nerd's take after a week with this game. I want to say thanks to Ubisoft for providing me with early access, but this is not a sponsored video, just the pros and cons that I experienced. Quick disclaimer, no spoilers, and no nixes were harmed in the making of this video. Start with the protagonist and the roleplay aspect. The devs describe this as an RPG. I guess if Assassin's Creed games are RPGs, then yeah, that works. You do get to make key decisions, level up your gear, and explore at your own pace. But you don't have that much agency in how events unfold. Not a criticism, just want to clarify that it's not Baldur's Gate in space. The main character, Kay Vess, is a decent protagonist. If you have issues with the fact that she's female, then I can't help you. She's not especially annoying or particularly charismatic, but she's relatable, has a few good one-liners, and it's interesting to learn more of her backstory as you play. Nicely animated, responsive, and well-voiced. The only issue I had was with some weird lip-syncing, which can bump you out of the story in the middle of a dramatic moment. Like I said, she is a real Han Solo type, but with boobs and a much cuter furry companion. At least Han as he appears in the Solo movie. You're kind of a nobody at the start of the game, and it feels natural that you need to build up rep with the various crime syndicates to survive. As you improve your standing and especially your gear, you become more formidable, and the game starts to fulfill its basic premise, putting you in the leather boots of a space-hopping badass for hire. Your companion Nix, on the other hand, is OP from the start. He can distract guards, kick away grenades, blow stuff up, or just facehug enemies while you effortlessly take them out. It took me a while to realize it, but the more you use him, the easier the game becomes, especially early on. Nix is also over-the-top cute, always doing something silly and making little chirps. They really went big with this little critter, and I wonder if some people might find it a bit much, but I am a sucker for characters like this if they're done well, and I think most players will be there for it. Plus, he's voiced by D. Bradley Baker. I mean, come on. The story itself is very linear, not one of those RPGs with dozens of permutations, but that's probably what people expect from a Ubisoft adventure. Big tentpole missions and loads of side quests, odd jobs and challenges on the side. But in many ways, the main character isn't Kay, but the world. Start with the pros. It genuinely is an open world. The maps are big and varied, and apart from the opening act, can be visited in any order and explored in any way you like. That level of freedom in a story-driven game isn't always easy to do, but again, it really helps to sell the premise. You're not bombarded with quests, but there are things to do, from big heists to small missions that will shift your reputation with the syndicates. I found a bunch of quests that were triggered by reading a data pad, passing close to a specific landmark, or just eavesdropping at the cantina. It's not quite Red Dead 2, But the fact that the game lets you do chill things like leaning on a balcony and watch the city, or share a meal with your buddy Nix, helps ground you in the setting and makes all those quests and tasks feel a bit less mechanical and mundane. It looks fantastic. We get 5 planetary locations, each one meticulously realized. They're all very different biomes with their own history. And it's cool to get a closer look at the criminal underworld, teased in some of the more recent Star Wars shows. There's a lot of eye candy in terms of weather effects, lighting, and other snazzy tech from the Snowdrop engine, which was built by Massive Entertainment, the Ubisoft studio responsible for Outlaws. When it comes to turning a lot of money into a lot of pixels, this game is a real show-off. The orbital space zones look great, and there's some fun stuff to do up there once you've got the hang of space combat. But the planetary locations will probably be a highlight of the game for many people. Even skeptics will admit they did a great job here, and it's clearly a labor of love. Walking into a cantina, jumping into hyperspace, and speeding across the Dune Sea feels just right. The areas are crammed with NPCs chattering or animals milling about, from massive shipwrecks to rusty speeders and market stalls. It's easy to find yourself wandering around just taking it in. Ubisoft Studios know how to build a beautiful and immersive environment. They also have a reputation for only going so deep. And the same is true here. I really could have used more interactivity with the environment. Maybe it's because the locations are so rich and exploration feels so cinematic, but it really clangs when you bump up against the limitations of the game and the spell is broken. That's always going to happen in a game like this, but I often felt I could have used a sprinkling of more things to do in these areas, aside from picking up missions, if only to reward me for looking around. Then again, the massive creative director did say they didn't want to make a 300-hour epic unfinishable RPG. I guess we appreciate that. Apparently it takes 30 hours to complete the main story and 50 to 60 hours to do everything. Based on what I saw, those numbers are a little low, but then again, I did spend a lot of time testing things, replaying levels, and getting clips for this video. Another thing that breaks immersion is the occasional sense of not knowing what you're doing or why. Quests are very easy to follow, but can often feel disconnected. Some of them complete without you realizing it. Ambient quests can disappear if you reload. These aren't important story beats, but again, it breaks the spell, and it makes it feel less like storytelling and more like box ticking. But the fact that you're hopping from job to job, in bed with all the warring factions and loyal to no one but yourself and Nix, that does fit with the whole Outlaw vibe. And Massive deliberately designed it so you can skip a lot of this stuff and just push through the main story if that's what you want. I was stuck on the first big map of Toshara longer than I expected. At this point in the game, you've got a ship and you want to go exploring. But the devs have built all these gameplay systems they need you to learn before they unleash you on an unsuspecting galaxy. You're not exactly railroaded, but you are stranded and forced to go looking for work with nothing but a flimsy plot contrivance as an explanation. Then again, once I'd done enough stuff on Toshara to be able to leave, part of me wanted to stay and see what else there was to do. The game does encourage you to revisit places you've already been to through career missions and other stuff. Now let's talk about those systems. The usual expectation with a Ubisoft game like this is that the combat, parkour, stealth, vehicles, minigames, and other stuff will all be good, but none of them will be exceptional. And that's more or less accurate. I actually thought the gunplay was better than expected, especially once you've unlocked a few of Kay's blaster upgrades. But because she's not a marksman, but a resourceful street kid, you need to combine all aspects of her toolkit, shooting, stealth, and platforming, to succeed in most missions. Spaceflight was very simplified compared to something like Star Wars Squadrons, but that's the right move for a game like this, where there's plenty to do in space, but the core action takes place on the ground. There's not much of a flying tutorial, but it's pretty easy to pick up and satisfying to do. So you're not totally baffled when you get into your first dogfight. And again, there are ship upgrades to give it more zip as you progress. The seamless transition from the atmosphere to open space is also really well done and immersive. Kay's speeder is also genuinely fun to ride around, although it's clearly designed for a controller and not for a mouse and keyboard. The wide open landscapes really encourage you to let rip. Just watch out for local fauna. The hacking and lockpicking minigames are well done, and didn't bore me after dozens of goes. You can also find arcade games in the world, which are a fun distraction. Navigating the environment is very straightforward. KVS is not much of a rooftop freerunner, but jumping, climbing, and squeezing through gaps feels nice and fluid. Many of the levels involve some mild platforming and climbing puzzles, and there are some secrets hidden away for eagle-eyed players. Now and then, you will have a clunky moment where you press crouch and Kay decides to dangle from a ledge instead. But that's nothing new. The weakest point was the stealth. Kay's animations and movement feel really nice and fluid, but the enemy detection is so inconsistent. And if you do get busted, the process of hiding and returning to an undetected state range from laughably easy to completely impossible. You sort of get used to it after a while, but I didn't find it very intuitive and often ended up blasting everything in the room, which is fine on lower difficulties, but doesn't cut it if you crank up the challenge. Melee takedowns are also a disappointment. They are visceral and violent in a street kid kind of way, but taking out armored guards with a slap to the side of the helmet just looks weird. Plus, there's no way to hide the bodies, and unless you encap the whole room, bodies get discovered and your cover is blown. You'd think the family of studios responsible for Assassin's Creed would be all over a stealth system like this. But it feels like they were trying to distance themselves from the Creed games and discourage that comparison. Kay is not an assassin after all, and this isn't game-breaking, but it's a misstep, and it really bugged me. Couple more points before the conclusion. There are a lot of customizable settings, separate difficulty sliders for almost everything you can think of, and it's worth playing around with the graphics settings on older PCs. I tested the game on 2 different rigs, and found that limiting the FPS to 60 on an older card made everything much smoother, even at 4K. Also, I really dug the interface with the retro-styled font. Super easy to navigate, and clearly they spend a lot of time tweaking the UX to make it just right. The sound design and score also deserve special mention. Whatever you say about Ubisoft's approach to their first Star Wars game, it looks like they spared no expense. But great expense doesn't necessarily make a great game. So, what's the verdict? Like I said at the start, I'm not going to give the game a score or tell you whether you should buy it. What I've done is play the living crap out of this game for a week, put it through its paces, and laid out what was good and what was bad. It's had a pretty rough ride from gamers in the run-up to release, but the flaws in the final game are quite different to the criticisms that have been thrown around online. Outlaws does play it safe with the setting, and the ambitions of the game are inevitably squeezed under the weight of the franchise, just like some of the movies. So yeah, it is very mainstream, and would benefit from more depth in places. But just writing it off as a cynical cash-in is hard to do once you've actually played it. There's a fun mix of systems, which create varied gameplay, a decent story and characters, and a deeply compelling game world. It's a real love letter to the original Star Wars movies, and that is probably the deciding factor. The more the last point resonates with you, the more pleasure you're likely to get from this game. Only you know where you stand on that. But I gotta say, I had a lot of fun with Star Wars Outlaws, in spite of some nagging complaints. And I hope some of those will be patched in the coming months. If that happens, I'll come back and update you guys. Meanwhile, some more 4K gameplay is on the way, both here and on Twitch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.